This movie is super trippy and unique. Let's do it. Last Night in Soho is about this young girl named Eloise Turner who goes by Ellie. We learned that Ellie's mom committed suicide not long ago, and she was a fashion designer, and Ellie wants to follow in her footsteps. Ellie sometimes sees the reflection and spirit of her mother in her mirrors, which her grandmother who has raised her is aware of. But Ellie is ecstatic when she gets accepted to the London College of Fashion, and she sets out from home to go follow her dreams. Ellie gets to school where she meets her roommate Jocasta, who is just a total attention-seeking bitch. She and a bunch of others make fun of Ellie because she likes old music and old 60s-style fashion. Because of this, Ellie is having a tough time adjusting, but she does meet this other student, John, who is super nice to her and very obviously has a crush on her right from the start. Ellie gets to a point where she can just simply no longer live with Jocasta, so she sees an ad in the newspaper by this woman, Miss Collins, for a room. So Ellie moves into this room, and Miss Collins is specifically like, all the other girls that have ever rented this room have run off on me, so don't be another one. So Ellie agrees, and she moves in, and she immediately starts having these really vivid dreams. In the dream, she is taken back to the 60s, where she takes on the persona of this girl named Sandy. So on the surface, she looks like Sandy, but when Sandy looks in the mirror, she sees Ellie. Sandy's dream is to become a headline singer at a club. So Ellie watches as Sandy dances in this club, and she meets this guy named Jack, who immediately takes a liking to her, and the two of them kind of start a relationship. So Ellie wakes up from this dream inspired and goes to school the next day and creates a version of this iconic pink dress in her fashion design class. Ellie also discovers that she has a hickey on her neck, and Jack had given Sandy a hickey in the dream. At night, Ellie goes to sleep and has another dream, and this time she watches as Sandy auditions for a Soho nightclub, which was arranged by Jack. After the audition, Sandy and Jack go back to Sandy's place, which of course is the same room that Ellie is now renting, so Sandy once lived here. Ellie becomes kind of obsessed with these visions that she's having and with Sandy in general, and she even dyes her hair blonde to kind of match her appearance. She also starts working at this local pub so she can have money to pay the rent for her room. At the pub, she meets this pub regular who follows her out one day and asks who her mother is because he recognizes her similarities to Sandy. Ellie gets kind of freaked out and she leaves without answering him, and she continues to have these dreams and visions of Sandy every night. But they get increasingly more disturbing because we learn that Jack is not who we thought he was, and he starts pimping Sandy out to some of his associates. He basically tells her, like, if you want to make it in show business, this is what you gotta do. So back in reality, Ellie is getting more and more disturbed and upset by these visions that she's having. She starts to see these apparitions of Jack and all of these, like, faceless men. Every night she continues to have these dreams and these visions, and one night she has a vision of Sandy meeting this man, and he's disguising himself as somebody who's gonna pay for Sandy's services, but in reality he low-key tells her, like, I'm a cop, I can help you. But she doesn't accept his help. And then Ellie has a vision of Jack brutally murdering Sandy in her bed by stabbing her. So Ellie is absolutely horrified by this, and she tries to go to the police to report a murder, even though it happened years ago, so they don't take her seriously. So she resorts to researching on her own, and she goes to the library and tries to look for newspaper articles or anything about Sandy's murder. But when she looks at all the news reports from around that time, she doesn't find anything about Sandy, but instead she finds newspaper articles about the disappearances of a bunch of random local men. Ellie is just slipping further and further from sanity, and while she's in the library, she has another vision of one of these faceless men. She goes to stab it with a scissor, but as she comes to, she realizes that the faceless man is actually Jocasta, and John stops her from stabbing her. Ellie at this point goes back to the pub where she confronts this man, thinking that he's Jack. And she very aggressively accuses him of murdering Sandy, which he's like, I ain't fucking do that. As he's going to leave the pub, Ellie follows him into the street, and he just turns around and says, whatever happened to Sandy, I'm sure is exactly what she deserved. And he goes to turn and leave and gets hit by a car and dies. Ellie is horrified, and at this point her boss runs out, who sees him in the street and is like, oh, poor Lindsay. And Ellie's like, what the fuck do you mean? Like, his name's not Jack? Her boss is like, no, he's Lindsay. He used to be a cop for years in Soho. It turns out he wasn't Jack. He was the cop that tried to help Sandy. John has been continuing to help Ellie despite the fact that when they went back to her room one night, she had an absolute fucking breakdown because she saw a vision of the faceless men and almost got him arrested. But again, he still wants to help her, so she goes to him and says, I need to get my stuff, I need to leave. So he brings her back to Miss Collins. John waits in the car as Ellie goes to get her stuff and tell Miss Collins that she's leaving. And Miss Collins is like, that's okay, dear. I know that you went to the police because the police came snooping around here. And then Ellie starts to feel a little dizzy, and she looks down and she sees some mail addressed to Miss Collins, which reveals that her first name is Alexandra. At this point, through flashbacks, we've revealed that Sandy's real name was Alexandra. So Miss Collins is Sandy, and she has now drugged Ellie. And it's revealed that the vision that Ellie saw of Jack murdering Sandy wasn't actually Jack murdering Sandy. It was supposed to be symbolic of like that version of Sandy being killed in that room, because that's where she had to bring back all those men. It turns out that that night, Sandy actually killed Jack. Then that's when she started going on this murderous rampage and killing any man that would come to see her. And she hid Jack's and all the other men's bodies in the floorboards and walls of this room. So Ellie starts to pass out, and Miss Collins is like, sorry, dear, I'm not going to stab you like the others, like it's quick, you're just going to go to sleep, but you know too much. Ellie falls to the ground and knocks over an ashtray, which then starts a fire. At this point, John comes in to check on Ellie, and Miss Collins proceeds to stab him in the stomach. Ellie manages to drag herself up the stairs, and Miss Collins comes at her with a knife, but Ellie actually sees it as Sandy coming at her with a knife. Ellie manages to kick Miss Collins down the stairs and get to her bedroom, where she is then confronted by the spirits of all of Sandy's victims. We also realize that the reason they're faceless is because Sandy was like, I had to eliminate their faces from my memory to cope with what was happening to me. And the spirits of these men try to get Ellie to avenge them and kill Miss Collins. But Ellie refuses, and a minute later, Miss Collins makes it back into the room, where she also sees the spirits of all the men, including Jack. Now, at this point, the police are coming, they hear sirens in the distance, and Miss Collins is like, I'm not going to prison. And she takes the knife and she starts to slit her own throat, but Ellie stops her. And now at this point, Ellie has a vision of her as young Sandy, and Ellie tells her, like, I understand why you did what you did. Sandy tells Ellie, get out, save yourself, and save the boy, and throws Ellie out of the room. Sandy stays in the burning building as Ellie runs downstairs and grabs John, who is barely alive, and the firemen break down the door and save them. Sometime later, we see they've made it to the end of the year, and Ellie has some fashion being showcased in the end of the year fashion show. Her grandmother is there, as is John, who survived, and they congratulate her on her success. The movie ends with Ellie looking in the mirror and seeing a reflection of her mother, who gives her like a proud smile. And she also sees a reflection of young Sandy, who blows her a kiss, and the movie ends.